Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading part 4, so let's get into it. You throwing a fit? Mort passed on the cup of coffee Ted offered and asked if he had a Coke or a Pepsi. Ted did, and after Mort had drunk it, his stomach settled. He had expected that just being here where Ted and Amy played house, now that they no longer had to bother with the cheap little town line motels, would make him angry and restless. It didn't. It was just a house, one where every room seemed to proclaim that the owner was a swinging young bachelor who was making it. Mort found that he could deal with that quite easily, although it made him feel a little nervous for Amy all over again. He thought of her little office with its clear, sane light and the soporific drone of the dryer coming through the wall. Her little office with its secret window, the only one in the whole place which looked down into the tight little angle of space formed by the house and the L, and thought how much she had belonged there and how little she seemed to belong here. But that was something she would have to deal with herself. And, he thought, after a few minutes in this other house, which was not a dreaded den of inequity at all, but only a house, that he could live with that he could even be content with it. She asked him if he would be staying in Derry overnight. I'll be going back as soon as we finish with the insurance adjusters. If something else pops, they can get in touch with me. Or you can. He smiled at her. She smiled back and touched his hand briefly. Ted didn't like it. He frowned out the window and fingered his pipe. They were on time for their meeting with the representatives of the insurance company, which undoubtedly relieved Ted Milner's mind. Mort was not particularly crazy about having Ted in attendance. It had never been Ted's house, after all, not even after the divorce. Still, it seemed to ease Amy's mind to have him there, and so Mort left it alone. Don Strick, the Consolidated Assurance Company agent, with whom they had done business, conducted the meeting at his office, where they went after another brief tour of the site. At the office, they met a man named Fred Evans, a consolidated field inspector specializing in arson. The reason Evans hadn't been with Wickersham and Bradley that morning, or at the site, when Strick met them there at noon, became obvious very quickly. He had spent most of the previous night poking through the ruins with a tin-cell flashlight and a Polaroid camera. He had gone back to his motel room, he said, to catch a few winks before meeting the Rainies. Mort liked Evans very much. He seemed to really care about the loss he and Amy had suffered, while everyone else, including Mr. Teddy Makes Three, seemed to have only mouthed the traditional words of sympathy before going on to whatever they considered the business at hand. And in Ted Milner's case, Mort thought, the business at hand was getting him out of Derry and back to Tashmore Lake as soon as possible. Fred Evans did not refer to 92 Kansas Street as the site. He referred to it as the house. His questions, while essentially the same as those asked by Wickersham and Bradley, were gentler, more detailed, and more probing. Although he'd had 4 hours' sleep at most, his eyes were bright, his speech quick and clear. After speaking with him for 20 minutes, Mort decided that he would deal with a company other than Consolidated Assurance if he ever decided to burn down a house for the insurance money, or wait until the man retired. When he had finished his questions, Evans smiled at them. "You've been very helpful, and I want to thank you again, both for your thoughtful answers and for your kind treatment of me." In a lot of cases, people's feathers get ruffled the second they hear the words insurance investigator. They're already upset, understandably so, and quite often they take the presence of an investigator on the scene as an accusation that they torched their own property. Given the circumstances, I don't think we could have asked for better treatment, Amy said, and Ted Milner nodded so violently that his head might have been on a string, one controlled by a puppeteer with a bad case of nerves. This next part is hard, Evans said. He nodded to Strick, who opened a desk drawer and produced a clipboard with a computer printout on it. When an investigator ascertains that a fire was as serious as this one clearly was, we have to show the clients a list of claimed insurable property. You look it over, then sign an affidavit swearing that the items listed still belong to you, and that they were still in the house when the fire occurred. You should put a check mark beside any item or items you've sold since the last insurance overhaul with Mr. Strick here, and any insured property which was not in the house at the time of the fire. Evans put a fist to his lips and cleared his throat before going on. I'm told that there has been a separation of residence recently, so that last bit may be particularly important. We're divorced, Mort said bluntly. I'm living in our place on Tashmore Lake. We only used it during the summers, but it's got a furnace and is livable during the cold months. Unfortunately, I hadn't got around to moving the bulk of my things out of the house up here. I'd been putting it off. Don Strick nodded sympathetically. Ted crossed his legs, fiddled with his pipe, and generally gave the impression of a man who is trying not to look as deeply bored as he is. Do the best you can with the list, Evans said. He took the clipboard from Strick and handed it across the desk to Amy. This can be a bit unpleasant. It's a little like a treasure hunt in reverse. Ted had put his pipe down and was craning at the list, his boredom gone, at least for the time being. His eyes were as avid as those of any bystander gleeping the aftermath of a bad accident. Amy saw him looking and obligingly tipped the form his way. Mort, who was sitting on the other side of her, tipped it back the other way. Do you mind? He asked Ted. He was angry, really angry, and they all heard it in his voice. Mort, Amy said. I'm not going to make a big deal of this, Mort said to her, but this is our stuff, Amy. Ours. I hardly think, Ted began indignantly. No, he's perfectly right, Mr. Milner, Fred Evans said with a mildness Mort felt might have been deceptive. The law says you have no right to be looking at the listed items at all. We wink at something like that if nobody minds, but I think Mr. Rainey does. You're damn tootin' Mr. Rainey does, Mort said. His hands were tightly clenched in his lap. He could feel his fingernails biting smile shapes into the soft meat of his palms. Amy switched her look of unhappy appeal from Mort to Ted. Mort expected Ted to huff and puff and try to blow somebody's house down, but Ted did not. Mort supposed it was a measure of his own hostile feeling toward the man that he'd made such an assumption. He didn't know Ted very well, although he did know he looked a bit like Alfalfa when you woke him up suddenly in a no-tell motel. But he knew Amy. If Ted had been a blowhard, she would have left him already. Smiling a little, speaking to her and ignoring Mort and the others completely, Ted said, Would it help matters if I took a walk around the block? Mort tried to restrain himself and couldn't quite do it. Why not make it two? He asked Ted with bogus amiability. Jesus. Amy shot him a narrow, dark stare, then looked back at Ted. Would you? This might be a little easier. Sure, he said. He kissed her high on the cheekbone, and Mort had another dolorous revelation. The man cared for her. He might not always care for her, but right now he did. Mort realized he had come halfway to thinking Amy was just a toy that had captivated Ted for a little while. A toy of which he would tire soon enough. But that didn't jibe with what he knew of Amy either. She had better instincts about people than that, and more respect for herself. Ted got up and left. Amy looked at Mort reproachfully. Are you satisfied? I suppose, he said. Look, Amy, I probably didn't handle that as well as I could have, but my motives are honorable enough. We shared a lot over the years. I guess this is the last thing, and I think it belongs between the two of us, okay? Strick looked uncomfortable. Fred Evans did not. He looked from Mort to Amy and then back to Mort again with the bright interest of a man watching a really good tennis match. Okay, Amy said in a low voice. He touched her hand lightly and she gave him a smile. It was strained, but better than no smile at all, he reckoned. He pulled his chair closer to hers, and they bent over the list, heads close together, like kids studying for a test. It didn't take Mort long to understand why Evans had warned them. He thought he had grasped the size of the loss. He had been wrong. Looking at the columns of cold computer type, Mort thought he could not have been more dismayed if someone had taken everything in the house at 62 Kansas Street and strewn it along the block for the whole world to stare at. He couldn't believe all the things he had forgotten, all the things that were gone. 7 major appliances, 4 TVs, 1 with a videotape editing hookup, the Spode china, and the authentic early American furniture which Amy had bought a piece at a time. The value of the antique armoire, which had stood in their bedroom, was listed at $14,000. They had not been serious art collectors, but they had been appreciators, and they had lost 12 pieces of original art. Their value was listed at $22,000, but Mort didn't care about the dollar value. He was thinking about the North Carolina Wyleth line drawing of 2 boys putting to sea in a small boat. It was raining in the picture. The boys were wearing slickers and galoshes and big grins. Mort had loved that picture, and now it was gone. The Waterford glassware, the sports equipment stored in the garage, skis, 10-speed bikes, and the Old Town canoe. Amy's 3 furs were listed. He saw her make tiny check marks beside the beaver and the mink, still in storage, apparently. But she passed the short fox jacket without checking it off. It had been hanging in the closet, warm and stylish outerwear for fall, when the fire happened. He remembered giving her that coat for her birthday 6 or 7 years ago. Gone now. His Celestron telescope, gone. The big puzzle quilt Amy's mother had given them when they were married. Amy's mother was dead, and the quilt was now so much ash in the wind. The worst, at least for Mort, was halfway down the second column, and again it wasn't the dollar value that hurt. 124 bots wine, the item read. Value, $4,900. Wine was something they had both liked. They weren't rabid about it, but they had built the little wine room in the cellar together, stocked it together, and had drunk the occasional bottle together. Even the wine, he said to Evans. Even that? Evans gave him an odd look that Mort couldn't interpret, then nodded. The wine room itself didn't burn because you had very little fuel oil in the cellar tank, and there was no explosion, but it got very hot inside, and most of the bottles burst. The few that didn't, well, I don't know much about wine, but I doubt if it would be good to drink. Perhaps I'm wrong. You're not, Amy said. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped it absently away. Evans offered her his handkerchief. She shook her head and bent over the list with Mort again. 10 minutes later, it was finished. They signed on the correct lines, and Strick witnessed their signatures. Ted Milner showed up only instants later, as if he had been watching the whole thing on some private view screen. "Is there anything else?" Mort asked Evan. "Not now. There may be. Is your number down in Tashmore unlisted, Mr. Rainey?" "Yes." He wrote it down for Evans. "Please get in touch if I can help." "I will." He rose, hand outstretched. "This is always a nasty business. I'm sorry you two had to go through it." They shook hands all around and left Strick and Evans to write reports. It was well past 1, and Ted asked Mort if he'd like to have some lunch with him and Amy. Mort shook his head. "I want to get back, do some work, and see if I can't forget all this for a while." And he felt as if maybe he really could write. That was not surprising. In tough times, up until the divorce anyway, which seemed to be an exception to the general rule, he had always found it easy to write. Necessary, even. It was good to have those make-believe words to fall back on when the real one had hurt you. He half expected Amy to ask him to change his mind, but she didn't. "Drive safe," she said, and planted a chaste kiss on the corner of his mouth. "Thanks for coming, and for being so reasonable about everything." "Can I do anything for you, Amy?" She shook her head, smiling a little, and took Ted's hand. If he had been looking for a message, this one was much too clear to miss. They walked slowly toward Mort's Buick. "You keep him well enough down there?" Ted asked. "Anything you need?" For the third time, he was struck by the man's southern accent. Just one more coincidence. "Can't think of anything," he said, opening the Buick's door and fishing the car keys out of his pocket. "Where do you come from originally, Ted? You or Amy must have told me sometime, but I'll be damned if I can remember. Was it Mississippi?" Ted laughed heartily. "A long way from there, Mort. I grew up in Tennessee, a little town called Shooter's Knob, Tennessee." Mort drove back to Tashmore Lake, with his hands clamped to the steering wheel, his spine as straight as a ruler, and his eyes fixed firmly on the road. He played the radio loud and concentrated ferociously on the music each time he sensed telltale signs of mental activity behind the center of his forehead. Before he had made 40 miles, he felt a pressing sensation in his bladder. He welcomed this development and did not even consider stopping at a wayside comfort station. The need to take a whiz was another excellent distraction. He arrived at the house around 4:30 and parked the Buick in its accustomed place around the side of the house. Eric Clapton was throttled in the middle of a full-tilt boogie guitar solo when Mort shut off the motor. In quiet, crashed down like a load of stones encased in foam rubber. There wasn't a single boat on the lake, not a single bug in the grass. Pissing and thinking have a lot in common, he thought, climbing out of the car and unzipping his fly. You can put them both off, but not forever. Mort Rainey stood there urinating and thought about secret windows and secret gardens. He thought about those who might own the latter and those who might look through the former. He thought about the fact that the magazine he needed to prove a certain fellow was either a lunatic or a con man had just happened to burn up on the very evening he had tried to get his hands on it. He thought about the fact that his ex-wife's lover, a man he cordially detested, had come from a town called Shooter's Knob, and that Shooter happened to be the pseudonym of the aforementioned loony or con man who had come into Mort Rainey's life at the exact time when the aforementioned Mort Rainey was beginning to grasp his divorce not just as an academic concept, but as a simple fact of his life forever after. He even thought about the fact that John Shooter claimed to have discovered Mort Rainey's act of plagiarism at about the same time Mort Rainey had separated from his wife. Question: were all these things coincidences? Answer: it was technically possible. Question: did he believe all these things were coincidences? Answer: no. Question: did he believe he was going mad then? The answer is no, Mort said. He does not. At least not yet. He zipped up his fly and went back around the corner to the door. He found his house key, started to put it in the lock, and then pulled it out again. His hand went to the doorknob instead, and as his fingers closed over it, he felt a clear certainty that it would rotate easily. Shooter had been here. Had been, or was still. And he wouldn't have needed to force entry. Either. Nope, not this sucker. Mort kept a spare key to the Tashmore Lake house in an old soap dish on a high shelf in the tool shed, which was where Shooter had gone to get a screwdriver in a hurry when the time had come to nail poor old Bump to the garbage cabinet. He was in the house now, looking around, or maybe hiding. He was... The knob refused to move. Mort's fingers simply slid around it. The door was still locked. Okay, Mort said. Okay, no big deal. He even laughed a little as he socketed the key home and turned it. Just because the door was locked didn't mean Shooter wasn't in the house. In fact, it made it more likely that he was in the house. When you really stopped to think about it, he could have used the spare key, put it back, then locked the door from the inside to lull his enemy's suspicions. All you had to do to lock it, after all, was to press the button set into the knob. He's trying to psych me out, Mort thought as he stepped in. The house was full of dusty late-afternoon sunlight and silence, but it did not feel like unoccupied silence. "You're trying to psych me out, aren't you?" he called. He expected to sound crazy to himself, a lonely, paranoid man addressing the intruder who only exists, after all, in his own imagination. But he didn't sound crazy to himself. He sounded instead like a man who has tumbled to at least half the trick. Only getting half a scam wasn't so great, maybe, but half was better than nothing. He walked into the living room with its cathedral ceiling, its window wall facing the lake, and, of course, the world-famous Mort Rainey sofa, also known as the couch of the comatose rider. An economical little smile tugged at his cheeks. His balls felt high and tight against the fork of his groin. "Half a scam's better than none, right, Mr. Shooter?" he called. The words died into dusty silence. He could smell old tobacco smoke in that dust. His eye happened on the battered package of cigarettes he had excavated from the drawer of his desk. It occurred to him that the house had a smell, almost a stink, that was horribly negative. It was an unwoman's smell. Then he thought, no, that's a mistake. That's not it. What you smell is Shooter. You smell the man, and you smell his cigarettes. Not yours, his. He turned slowly around, his head cocked back. The second-floor bedroom looked down on the living room halfway up the cream-colored wall. The opening was lined with dark brown wooden slats. The slats were supposed to keep the unwary from falling out and splattering themselves all over the living room floor. But they were also supposed to be decorative. Right then, they didn't look particularly decorative to Mort. They looked like the bars of a jail cell. All he could see of what he and Amy had called the guest bedroom was the ceiling and one of the bed's 4 posts. "You up there, Shooter?" he yelled. There was no answer. I know you're trying to psych me out. Now he was beginning to feel just the tiniest bit ridiculous. It won't work, though. About 6 years before, they had plugged the big fieldstone fireplace in the living room with a black stone Jersey stove. A rack of fire tools stood beside it. Mort grasped the handle of the ash shovel, considered it for a moment, then let go of it, and took the poker instead. He faced the barred guest room overlook and held the poker up like a knight saluting his queen. Then he walked slowly to the stairs and began to climb them. He could feel tension worming its way into his muscles now, but he understood it wasn't Shooter he was afraid of. What he was afraid of was finding nothing. I know you're here, and I know you're trying to psych me out. The only thing I don't know is what it's all about, Alfie, and when I find you, you better tell me. He paused on the second floor landing, his heart pumping hard in his chest now. The guest room door was to his left. The door to the guest bathroom was to the right. Then he suddenly understood that Shooter was here all right, but not in the bedroom. No, that was just a ploy. That was just what Shooter wanted him to believe. Shooter was in the bathroom. And as he stood there on the landing with the poker clutched tightly in his right hand and sweat running out of his hair and down his cheeks, Mort heard him. A faint shuffle. He was in there all right, standing in the tub by the sound. He had moved the tiniest bit. Peekaboo, Johnny boy, I hear you. Are you armed, fuckface? Mort thought he probably was, but he didn't think it would turn out to be a gun. Mort had an idea that the man's pen name was about as close to firearms as he had ever come. Shooter had looked like the sort of guy who would feel more at home with instruments of a blunter nature. What he had done to Bump seemed to bear this out. I bet it's a hammer, Mort thought, and wiped sweat off the back of his neck with his free hand. He could feel his eyes pulsing in and out of their sockets in time with his heartbeat. I'm betting it's a hammer from the tool shed. He had no more thought of this before he saw Shooter, saw him clearly, standing in the bathtub in his black round-crowned hat and his yellow shit-kicker work shoes, his lips split over his mail-order dentures in a grin which was really a grimace. Sweat trickling down his own face, running down the deep lines grooved there like water running down a network of galvanized tin gutters, with the hammer from the tool shed raised to shoulder height like a judge's gavel, just standing there in the tub, waiting to bring the hammer down. Next case, bailiff. I know you, buddy. I got your number. I got it the first time I saw you, and guess what? You picked the wrong writer to fuck with. I think I've been wanting to kill somebody since the middle of May, and you'll do as well as anybody. He turned his head toward the bedroom door. At the same time, he reached out with his left hand after drying it on the front of his shirt so his grip wouldn't slip at the crucial moment, and curled it around the bathroom doorknob. I know you're in there. I know you're in there, he shouted at the closed bedroom door. If you're under the bed, you better get out. I'm counting to 5. If you're not out by the time I get there, I'm coming in, and I'll come in swinging. You hear me? There was no answer. But then, he hadn't really expected one, or wanted one. He tightened his grip on the bathroom doorknob, but would shout the numbers toward the guest room door. He didn't know if Shooter would hear or sense the difference if he turned his head in the direction of the bathroom, but he thought Shooter might. The man was obviously clever, hellishly clever. In the instant before he started counting, he heard another faint movement in the bathroom. He would have missed it, even standing this close, if he hadn't been listening with every bit of concentration he could muster. 1. Christ, he was sweating like a pig. 2. The knob on the bathroom door was like a cold rock in his clenched fist. 3. He turned the knob of the bathroom door and slammed it. bouncing the door off the wall hard enough to chop through the wallpaper and pop the door's lower hinge. And there he was. There he was, coming at him with a raised weapon, with teeth bared in a killer's grin, and his eyes were insane, utterly insane, and Mort brought the poker down in a whistling overhand blow, and he had just time enough to realize that Shooter was also swinging a poker, and to realize that Shooter was not wearing his round-crowned black hat, and to realize it wasn't Shooter at all, to realize it was him. The madman was him. And then the poker shattered the mirror over the wash basin, and silver-backed glass sprayed every which way, twinkling in the gloom, and the medicine cabinet fell into the sink. The bent door swung open like a gaping mouth, spilling bottles of cough syrup and iodine and Listerine. "I killed a goddamn fucking mirror!" he shrieked, and was about to sling the poker away when something did move in the tub. Behind the corrugated shower door, there was a frightened little squeal. Grinning, Mort slashed sideways with the poker, tearing a jagged gash through the plastic door and knocking it off its tracks. He raised the poker over his shoulder, his eyes glassy and staring, his lips drawn into the grimace he had imagined on Shooter's face. Then he lowered the poker slowly. He found he had to use the fingers of his left hand to pry open the fingers of his right, so that the poker would fall to the floor. "We slick-it, cowering beastie," he said to the field mouse scurrying blindly about in the tub. "What a panic's in thy beastie." His voice sounded hoarse and flat and strange. Didn't sound like his own voice at all. It was like listening to himself on tape for the first time. He turned and walked slowly out of the bathroom, past the leaning door with its popped hinge, his shoes gritting on broken mirror glass. At once, he wanted to go downstairs and lie on the couch and take a nap. All at once, he wanted that more than anything else in the world. It was the telephone that woke him up. Twilight had almost become night, and he made his way slowly past the glass-topped coffee table that liked to bite with a weird feeling that time. Had somehow doubled back on itself. His right arm ached like hell. His back wasn't in much better shape. Exactly how hard had he swung that poker anyway? How much panic had been driving him? He didn't like to think. He picked up the telephone, not bothering to guess who it might be. Life has been so dreadfully busy lately that it might even be the president. "Hello?" "How you doing, Mr. Rainey?" the voice asked, and Mort recoiled, snatching the telephone away from his ear for a moment as if it were a snake which had tried to bite. He returned it slowly. "I'm doing fine, Mr. Shooter," he said in a dry, spitless voice. "How are you doing?" "I'm a country fair," Shooter allowed, speaking in that thick, cracker-barrel southern accent that was somehow as bald and starting as a unpainted barn, standing all by itself in the middle of the field. "But I don't think you're really all that well. Stealing from another man, that don't seem to have ever bothered you none. Being caught up on, though, that seems to have given you the pure miseries." "What are you talking about?" Shooter sounded faintly amused. "Well, I heard on the radio news that someone burned down your house, your other house, and then, when you come back down here, it sounded like you pitched a fit or something once you got into the house, shouting, racking on things. Or maybe it's just that successful writers like you throw tantrums when things don't go the way they expect. Is that it, maybe?" My God, he was here. He was. Mort found himself looking out the window as if Shooter still might be out there, hiding in the bushes, perhaps, while he spoke to Mort on some sort of cordless telephone. Ridiculous, of course. The magazine with my story is on its way, he said. When it gets here, are you going to leave me alone? Shooter still sounded lazily amused. There isn't any magazine with that story in it, Mr. Rainey. You and me, we know that. Not from 1980, there isn't. How could there be? How could there be? When my story wasn't there for you to steal until 1982. God damn it, I did not steal your When I heard about your house, Shooter said, I went out and bought an Evening Express. They had a picture of what was left. Wasn't very much. Had a picture of your wife, too. There was a long, thoughtful pause. Then Shooter said, She's purty. He used the country pronunciation, purposefully, sarcastically. How'd an ugly son of a buck like you luck into such a purty wife, Mr. Rainey? We're divorced, he said. I told you that. Maybe she discovered how ugly I was. Why don't we leave Amy out of this? It's between you and me. For the second time in 2 days, he realized he had answered the phone while he was only half awake and nearly defenseless. As a result, Shooter was in almost total control of the conversation. He was leading Mort by the nose, calling the shots. Hang up, then. But he couldn't. At least not yet. Between you and me, it is, Shooter asked. Oh, sorry. Between you and me, is it? Shooter asked. Then I don't suppose you even mentioned me to anyone else. What do you want? Tell me. What in the hell do you want? You want the second reason I came? Is that it? Yes. I want you to write me a story, Shooter said calmly. I want you to write a story and put my name on it and then give it to me. You owe me that. Right is right and fair is fair. Mort stood in the hallway with the telephone clutched in his aching fist and a vein pulsing in the middle of his forehead. For a few moments, his rage was so total that he found himself buried alive inside it, and all he was capable of thinking was, So that's it? So that's it? So that's it? Over and over again. You there, Mr. Rainey? Shooter asked in his calm, drawling voice. The only thing I'll write for you, Mort said, his own voice slow and syrupy thick with rage, is your death warrant, if you don't leave me alone. You talk big, Pilgrim, Shooter said in the patient voice of a man explaining a simple problem to a stupid child. Because you know I can't put no hurtin' on you. If you had stolen my dog or my car, I could take your dog or car. I could do that just as easy as I broke your cat's neck. If you tried to stop me, I could put a hurtin' on you and take it away. But this is different. The goods I want are inside your head. You got the goods locked up like they were inside a safe. Only I can't just blow off the door or torch open the back. I have to find me the combination, don't I? I don't know what you're talking about, Mort said. But the day you get a story out of me will be the day the Statue of Liberty wears a diaper, Pilgrim. Shooter said meditatively, I'd leave her out of it if I could, but I'm starting to think you ain't going to leave me with that option. All the spit in Mort's mouth was suddenly gone, leaving it dry and glassy and hot. What do you... Do you want to wake up from one of your stupid naps and find Amy nailed to the garbage bin? Shooter asked. Or turn on the radio some morning and hear she came off second best in a match with the chainsaw you keep in your garage up there? Or did the garage burn too? Watch what you say, Mort whispered. His wide eyes began to prickle with tears of rage and fear. You still have 2 days to think about it. I'd think about it real close, Mr. Rainey. I mean, I'd really hunker down over her if I were you. And I don't think I'd talk about this to anyone else. That'd be like standing out in a thunderstorm and tempting the lightning. Divorced or not, I have got an idea you still have some feeling for that lady. It's time for you to grow up a little. You can't get away with it. Don't you realize that yet? I know what you did, and I ain't quitting until I get what's mine. You're crazy, Mort screamed. Good night, Mr. Rainey, Shooter said, and hung up. Mort stood there for a moment, the handset sinking away from his ear. Then he scooped up the bottom half of the princess-style phone. He was on the verge of throwing the whole combination against the wall before he was able to get a hold of himself. He set it down again and took a dozen deep breaths, enough to make his head feel swimmy and light. Then he dialed Herb Creekmore's home telephone. Herb's lady friend, Dolores, picked it up on the second ring and called Herb to the telephone. Hi, Mort, Herb said. What's the story on the house? His voice moved away from the telephone's mouthpiece a little. Dolores, will you move that skillet to the back burner? Supper time in New York, Mort thought, and he wants me to know it. Well, what the hell? A maniac has just threatened to turn my wife into veal cutlets, but life has to go on, right? The house is gone, Mort said. The insurance will cover the loss. He paused. The monetary loss, anyway. I'm sorry, Herb said. Can I do anything? Well, not about the house, Mort said, but thanks for offering. About the story, though. What story is that, Mort? He felt his hand tightening down on the telephone's handset again and forced himself to loosen up. He doesn't know what the situation is up here. You have to remember that. The one my nutty friend is kicking sand about? He said, trying to maintain a tone which was light and mostly unconcerned. Sewing season? Ellery Queen's mystery magazine? Oh, that, Herb said. Mort felt a jolt of fear. You didn't forget to call, did you? Oh, no, I called, Herb reassured him. I just forgot all about it for a minute. You losing your house and all. Well, what did they say? Don't worry about a thing. They're going to send a Xerox over to me by messenger tomorrow, and I'll send it right up to you by Federal Express. You'll have it by 10 o'clock day after tomorrow. For a moment it seemed that all his problems were solved, and he started to relax. Then he thought of the way Shooter's eyes had blazed, the way he had brought his face down until his forehead and Mort's were almost touching. He thought of the dry smell of cinnamon on Shooter's breath as he said, You lie. A Xerox? He was by no means sure that Shooter would accept an original copy. But a Xerox? No, he said slowly. That's no good, Herb. No Xerox. No phone call from the editor. It has to be an original copy of the magazine. Well, that's a little tougher. They have their editorial offices in Manhattan, of course, but they store copies at their subscription offices in Pennsylvania. They only keep about 5 copies of each issue. It's really all they can afford to keep, when you consider that EQMM has been publishing since 1941. They really aren't crazy about lending them out. Come on, Herb. You can find those magazines at yard sales and in half the small-town libraries in America. But never a complete run. Herb paused. Not even a phone call will do, huh? Are you telling me this guy is so paranoid he'd think he was talking to one of your thousands of stooges? from the background. Do you want me to pour the wine, Herb? Herb spoke again with his mouth away from the phone. Hold on a couple of minutes, Dee. I'm holding up your dinner, Mort said. I'm sorry. It goes with the territory. Listen, Mort, be straight with me. Is this guy as crazy as he sounds? Is he dangerous? I don't think so, he said, but I want him off my back, Herb. He hesitated, searching for the right tone. I've spent the last half year or so walking through a shitstorm. This might be one thing I can do something about. I just want the doofus off my back. Okay, Herb said with sudden decision. I'll call Marianne Jaffrey over at EQMM. I've known her for a long time. If I ask her to ask the library curator, that's what they call the guy, honest, the library curator, to send us a copy of the June 1980-ish, she'll do it. Is it okay if I say you might have a story for them at some point in the future? Sure, Mort said, and thought, tell her it'll be under the name John Shooter, and almost laughed aloud. Good. She'll have the curator send it on to you Federal Express, direct from Pennsylvania. Just return it in good condition, or you'll have to find a replacement copy at one of those yard sales you were talking about. Is there any chance all this could happen by the day after tomorrow? Mort asked. He felt miserably sure that Herb would think he was crazy for even asking. And he surely must feel that Mort was making an awfully big mountain out of one small molehill. I think there's a very good chance, Herb said. I won't guarantee it, but I'll almost guarantee it. Thanks, Herb, Mort said with honest gratitude. You're swell. Aw, shucks, ma'am, Herb said, doing the bad John Wayne imitation of which he was so absurdly proud. Now go get your dinner, and give Dolores a kiss for me. Herb was still in his John Wayne mode. To heck with that. I'll give her a kiss for me, Pilgrim. You talk big, Pilgrim. Mort felt such a spurt of horror and fear that he almost cried out aloud. Same word, same flat, startling drawl. Shooter had tapped his phone line somehow, and no matter who Mort tried to call or what number he dialed, it was John Shooter who answered. Herb Creekmore had become just another one of his pen names, and... Mort? Are you still there? He closed his eyes. Now that Herb had dispersed with the bogus John Wayne imitation, it was okay. It was just Herb again, and always had been. Herb using that word that had just been... What? Just another float in the parade of coincidences? Okay, sure, no problem. I'll just stand on the curb and watch it slide past. Why not? I've already watched half a dozen bigger ones go by. Right here, Herb, he said, opening his eyes. I was just trying to figure out how I do love thee. You know, counting the ways. You're thrilly, Herb said, obviously pleased. And you're going to handle this carefully and prudently, right? Right. Then I think I'll go eat supper and with the light of my life. Sounds like a good idea. Goodbye, Herb, and thanks. You're welcome. I'll try to make it the day after tomorrow. Dee says goodbye, too. If she wants to pour the wine, I bet she does, Mort said, and they both hung up laughing. As soon as he put the telephone back on its table, the fantasy came back. Shooter. He did the police in different voices. Of course. He was alone and it was dark, a condition which bred fantasies. Nevertheless, he did not believe, at least in his head, that John Shooter was either a supernatural being or a supercriminal. If he had been the former, he would surely know that Morton Rainey had not committed plagiarism, at least not on that particular story, and if he had been the latter, he would have been off knocking over a bank or something, not farting around Western Maine trying to squeeze a short story out of a writer who made a lot more money from his novels. He started slowly back toward the living room, intending to go through to the study and try the word processor when a thought, at least not that particular story, struck him and stopped him. What exactly did that mean? Not that particular story. Had he ever stolen someone else's work? For the first time since Shooter had turned up on his porch with his sheaf of pages, Mort considered this question seriously. A good many reviews of his books had suggested that he was not really an original writer, that most of his works consisted of twice-told tales. He remembered Amy reading a review of The Organ Grinder's Boy, which had first acknowledged the book's pace and readability, and then suggested a certain derivativeness in its plotting. She said, "So what? Don't these people know there are only about 5 really good stories and writers just tell them over and over with different characters?" Mort himself believed there were at least 6 stories: success, failure, love and loss, revenge, mistaken identity, the search for a higher power, be it God or the devil. He had told the first 4 over and over obsessively, and now that he thought of it, Sowing Season embodied at least 3 of those ideas. But was that plagiarism? If it was, every novelist at work in the world would be guilty of the crime. Plagiarism, he decided, was outright theft, and he had never done it in his life. Never. Never, he said, and strode into his study with his head up and his eyes wide, like a warrior approaching the field of battle. And there he sat for the next 1 hour, and words he wrote none. That's it for this week. We will see you guys next week with part 5.